So I want to say thank you to each and every one of you for being here tonight. It's really amazing and awesome to see the Moot courtroom this full. We have a really interesting evening tonight, and I do appreciate you coming out. So my name is Jerry White Jr. I'm your Spokane Riverkeeper. We are a nonprofit river advocate here in Spokane that really is your voice for the Spokane River, as well as really the voice for the river, such that we can give the river a voice. So I'm going to say a few words. I am moderating tonight, and I'm just going to say a few words to frame out this discussion. And then I'll introduce very briefly the panelists that we have assembled, and I will invite them to introduce themselves when they come up. So as a part of being a riverkeeper, I have spent 9 years now working on the Spokane River, literally on the river or working on issues that involve the river. I think I have my 10,000 hours in, but what has happened in that 9 years is that I feel like I've formed a very personal relationship with the river. So it's more than a policy relationship, it's more than a relationship of amusement. It's a very deep relationship now that I care about a great deal. And in a sense, that is what is motivating me as a riverkeeper to get into this issue with the organization, is to begin to explore this idea of being in relation with our Spokane River in a way really that is more than what our legal system currently represents. In fact, I'll just turn my notes over and just talk. You know, right now we have the Clean Water Act, we have the Washington Water Pollution Control Act, we have shoreline laws, we have a number of kinds of legal frameworks to help protect the river. But what they are really doing is holding the river in an ancient English legal system, in a common law system that allows, that really it imagines that Spokane River to be your property in common. And the uses, your uses of that river are protected under this law. So the river really is only being protected right now insofar as it has utility for you as two-legged humans, right, as people. It doesn't suppose that the river might be afforded rights on its own to exist and be protected and thrive and be healthy in and of itself. And for me, this is a deficiency. And I'm not here tonight to put forward this conversation that we're going to have with our panelists as a way of saying, affording the river rights, affording nature rights, is a total solution. It's not. We will always need the Clean Water Act, in the way I see it, which is 50 years old this year. I guess it was last year. We'll always need the Clean Water Act. We'll always need other bodies of law that we currently have. However, I believe, it's my belief as a riverkeeper now, that we really need to begin to address this idea that we're in relationship with this river, and we recognize the Spokane River as a community member alongside us. Sound radical? I don't think so, but I welcome the dialogue. So that's why we're having this conversation tonight, and what we've done as we've pulled together several panelists who are really far more experts even than I am on this subject. And we envision having each of three panelists talk for some time, and then a session for a question-answer period after. Let's see if I have not said anything I really wanted to say. I think the last thing I would like to say is I would most certainly like to recognize the presence and the perspectives of the Spokane tribe and the Coeur d'Alene tribe, both of whom who have been here since time immemorial, being water keepers. To that degree, I would extend that to the Nez Perce tribe. We have a Nez Perce tribal member up today to share perspectives with us today. I would also like to really recognize that the Spokane River is running just a few feet from us tonight. And I think we owe I think it's time for us to be responsible for the care of the river. With that, I'm going to introduce, just briefly, and I'm going to let you all introduce yourselves, but I'm going to introduce three folks. Elliott Moffett, who is a Nez Perce tribal member and an employee of the Nez Perce tribe, who was a co-founder of Nimiipuu Protecting the Environment and has been involved in putting together a resolution at the Nez Perce tribal level that would afford or recognize giving rights to the Snake River. We have Carolyn Keever, who is a third-year law student here in Gonzaga. And Carolyn is here to talk about her perspectives as a younger person getting out into the profession of working with the environment, in the environment, and being a part of the environment. So looking forward to what Carolyn is going to say tonight. And we have Kai Huschke, Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, a lecturer for CELDF, and a senior staff member for that organization. So this is a pretty amazing assemblage of people. And with that, I'm going to yield the floor. And one little piece of housekeeping. If anyone needs to use the restroom, it's out and to the left, and then another sharp right. There you go. With that, I think I would invite Kai to come on up to talk. Thank you, Kai.
Thanks, Jerry and the Spokane Riverkeepers for inviting me here tonight. Really appreciate being here. Jerry said it's a conversation. It's kind of interesting because this is a conversation that's been ongoing, or at least was initially introduced in Spokane 15 years ago for people who were involved in the Envision Spokane Community Bills of Rights effort that had a principal piece of it was about the right of the Spokane River. So it's very interesting to see where we've come since that initial conversation, and also globally where rights of nature has come since that time. And in the way of movements going, it's actually gone on a very, very fast trajectory comparatively. If you start to look at people's movements and how long they take, it's quite stunning that rights of nature has gotten to where it's gotten to. So I think that's the good part of where we sit today. As Jerry mentioned, the Spokane River is sitting right there. We should probably be out by the river instead of in here and just listening to the river. Probably learn more than we will about people like myself talking, but we're here now, so I guess we'll stick to that format. It's also interesting in what Jerry was framing about our status as trying to be protectors, stewards, good people in relation to the river, and how our methods of doing so are really upside down, meaning the laws themselves, what they're based on, the value system that they're constructed on. How do we go about actually doing the good work when the tools that we're supposed to be given are really antithetical to that work itself? And that's not an easy thing still in the line of work that I've been doing for people to come to the conclusion of, because they want to believe that we have these environmental laws, that they're working, everything's great. But the good thing is more and more people, more and more organizations are coming to the understanding that perhaps what we put together really isn't up for the challenge. And if you look at the Spokane River itself, people talk about the river and having an affinity to river, and we love the river. But when you start to look at the river itself, it makes you wonder, are we loving the river to death kind of a thing? And I don't mean in a way that says we're doing it doing right by it, but in the opposite manner. You know, we've dammed the river, we keep polluting the river, we keep extracting probably more water out of the river than the river deserves. Yet here we are, and we know how critical that ecosystem is, yet we keep still doing things in a manner that seem opposite to what we know is the right thing to do. And then I say we, I say the collective we. Don't necessarily mean people in this room, but we are all part of the dominant system in large degree. However else we may carve ourselves out from that, we're still part of that. And it's not an easy thing to operate in that world, by the way, how that dominant system is constructed. But it's not a pretty sight when we begin to see where we're headed, not just for the Spokane River, but other ecosystems if we continue on this path. Because it's not just how the laws and regulations work in relation to the Spokane River, but those are the same laws and regulations that work with any other kind of ecosystem. And unfortunately, the model that is here in the United States is very similarly undertaken in other places, some worse, some better, let's say, but it's not so different. When you have this mindset of consumption, this mindset of capitalism, you know, really the colonial onset of, you know, Europeans hasn't stopped. We think colonialism has stopped. It's just taken on different names, and it's manifested itself in different ways, which is largely about dominating something, controlling something, and ultimately, unfortunately, destroying it. And that's kind of what we're doing, not just to the environment, but to ourselves. And I think it's because of the relationship piece that Jerry was speaking to is a large reason why we see ourselves as separate from the natural world versus actually being not just part of it, but we are the natural world. And that is a very, very difficult thing. It's still a hard thing for me to come to grips with, even though I do this work on a daily basis. You know, the culture sets a certain expectation, a certain way of being, a certain kind of behavior. And it's a very difficult thing, even if you're conscious about it, even if you're working at it, to come out from underneath of, because it pushes you back in all the time, keeps wanting to push you back into doing it the way that it's been done, let's say, for the last 100 years. And we will look at the Spokane River itself. You know, it's quite stunning when you have things like the dam licensing efforts, you know, come up. You know, FERC has their thing come up, and then you're allowed to comment. And then your comments are basically done for the next 50 years until that permit renewal comes up again. And basically bestowing more power and privilege to the utility company than it is really to the people, let alone the river itself. You know, in essence, where's the river? You know, where's the river in the courtroom? Where's the river in our lives? Or the fact that by the falls today you have a statue of first persons holding up a salmon, and that's the only sort of thing we have anymore around the salmon because, well, they don't run in the river anymore because we decided to build a dam. And yet we want to do the good work to actually protect the river. And I would argue that the river isn't made whole until the salmon are running again, until the water's clean again, until all these things that we deal with today and try to do the best we can with actually changes radically. So gone needs to be the days when we determine how much toxicity a fish has to say how much fish you can consume on a monthly basis. Why should the fish have any poison in it? Why isn't that the standard? And unfortunately, the way things work, the way the laws work, the way the regulations work, the way that capitalism and consumption and the colonialistic way operates, it doesn't care. It just doesn't care, regardless if we care. And we have to figure out a way to mobilize in a manner that actually changes that changes the relationship. And it's interesting in the work that I've been involved in, you know, we've used the law as a means to try to help change culture. And I think it's had some impact for sure. But I think we've come to the revelation at our organization that, well, now the cultural stuff has to actually manifest. The people mobilization has to manifest in a way, and then the laws will come, you know, post that. You know, the idea is how do you become effective to actually change behavior on a large scale level? It's not an easy thing to undertake. But Spokane has a part of it, believe it or not, for those that may not be aware, that it's contributed to this idea of legal rights of nature as it's evolved. And the reason it's come from that is really out of necessity. I mean, the communities that we've worked with have seen how the environmental laws have worked. They see who it privileges and who it benefits. And it's not them or the environment that they're a part of. It's largely large corporate interests who begin to, you know, cite themselves in a particular place and then they benefit, and then they leave all the consequences to the communities and the environment at hand. Meaning that these environmental laws are largely set up, not all of them, but largely set up to determine how much and how fast you pollute or undermine ecosystems themselves. They make determinations, and then there's all kinds of regulations. Then you have groups like the Riverkeepers who are trying to hold those to account, unfortunately on the bedrock of things that are still not actually commensurate to the real impact that's taking place. And that's why we are, in some ways, we have a virtual system living in the real world. So they've created this sort of fantasy system without maybe fully realizing, or maybe they have, that it's going to have real world impacts. And so this is why things have to shift radically if we're actually going to do the good work, not just for ourselves as the human community, but all the other communities that rely on healthy ecosystems. And I think part of that is to get out of this mindset that we are separate from nature. We are nature, and the more we reinforce that, which probably has to happen at a very early age and has to be reinforced and so on, until we actually get to that point, it's going to be awfully difficult, I think, to make the bigger transition. With that said, rights of nature has, like I said, taken off quite fast, quite rapidly, quite steeply, because people have been bold enough to put the idea out there, because these are how it starts. This is how it starts. In Western legal construct, the idea of the rightless becoming rights-bearing, someone had to propose the idea that that was feasible, or that was just, or that was ethically correct, or that was moral, whatever the justification was. Someone at some point had to pose the idea that perhaps nature should no longer be seen as property, but nature should be rights-bearing. And that work in the Western legal construct is still fairly new. As Elliott will speak to, the ideas of rights of nature are not new. They're very old. It's very traditional. It's very customary in the sense of how first peoples around the world understood themselves in relation to their place. But in a Western legal construct, it is completely 180 degrees different than how we see nature today. We see nature as property. We see nature as something that you can extract from. We see nature that can be controlled. Even when we try to do the good work, it's largely, I think, to Jerry's point, really for human benefit. You know, when you have 50% of the U.S. waterways that are undrinkable, you can't recreate in them, you can't fish in them, that's pretty telling about how far off we are, in essence, to our connection to place, to connection to the very life systems that we need, water, of course, being a very critical one. But as far as rights of nature from a legal construct, it really started with people saying, hey, we need a different approach, let's try it. And that's ultimately how it's started to take off. So you actually had small communities back east actually institute rights of nature laws. That idea actually made its way to Spokane, eventually made its way to Ecuador to be in their national constitution. And then since that point, there have been hundreds and hundreds of other either local laws, state level laws, federal level laws, or high court decisions being made in the name of nature's rights. And what I mean by that, in the sense of nature's rights, is to what Jerry also pointed out. It's this idea that nature has the right to exist, persist, flourish, naturally evolve, all the things that I think we would say for ourselves that we should have. It's actually looking at ecosystems saying that they need to have those same kinds of protections. And in the years, it's been about how do humans articulate that, which is a very tricky thing, right? Because we're not the river, we're not the forest, but how do humans actually, through human language and things like human laws, begin to represent it adequately? And that's been an ongoing process to figure out what that looks like. The interesting thing is there's starting to be some very telling judicial cases coming out. Ecuador having the longest time now with rights of nature from a Western legal construct since they adopted it in 2008. They've had some very interesting cases come out that actually show, well, what does it really mean in sort of the real world? And there was a great case that came out in 2021, I think it was, in a place called Los Cedros, which is a cloud forest in Ecuador. Lower governmental agencies had issued mining permits to a Canadian mining company to mine there. Someone took issue with it, filed a lawsuit, and eventually that case made it up to its high court. And the argument was, amongst many things, including people's right to a healthy climate, people's right to water, was to allow this mining operation to go forward would be a violation of the rights of that ecosystem. And the court agreed. It looked at what was going to happen. It looked at the impacts to the ecosystem. It looked at the potential impacts to humans. It even employed things like the precautionary principle, taking the idea of prevention and actually looking at that saying, no, we can't let this go forward because there's enough indicators that say it's going to be damaging. So therefore, we're going to rescind the permits. Think about that in US law today if that were to happen. It's something that doesn't happen. We do inventories through things like SEPA and NEPA and all these other kinds of things, but they're not mandated in the sense of if you see harm, it should stop. It's more like, well, this could happen and maybe we'll address some pieces, maybe we'll mitigate that, but ultimately we're going to let the commercial or industrial activity proceed. In one of the realms of where that's happening rapidly and unfortunately, even though it's being painted as somehow a savior for us, is this idea of green energy and electrification. If you really look deeply at what that involves, it's not much different than any other kind of extractive industry that we've been part of for 100 years. Yet now that's the next sort of saving grace. Yet if you look at the processes, the permitting processes, the real environmental impact, the cultural impacts, it's pretty devastating. But unfortunately, the dominant system is the dominant system, which is all about commerce. It's about consuming. And so we have a lot of work to do, not just to elevate rights of nature, but to actually look at many other aspects of our system, including really the relationship we have to property itself. And I'm not talking the property of just your house, but we see everything as property. That permit, when it gets issued, is property. The corporation is property. All these things are really paper property. Yet they get all kinds of tremendous protection from a legal perspective that allows them to proceed regardless of the consequences that we are seeing firsthand. And so rights of nature, I think, is proven and is showing itself to be a very valuable way to sort of shift that relationship, to shift that behavior, to maybe drive us to a different place, which ultimately I think is coming full circle, which is back to where we should have been in the first place. And so I think that's its value. I don't think it's an end point, I think it's a through point, but there's a tremendous amount of capability and probability and possibility in rights of nature itself, meaning the Spokane River should have rights and enforceable rights, not just in name, but they should be enforceable as a means to start confronting the things that are actually harming it, including the dams, including the pollution taking place. It means really changing our relationship, not just personally, but also commercially, industrially, economically, however it's going to be, we have to shift because we can't keep on the course that we're going. I mean, each of us can open up our browser on a daily basis or grab the paper, and there's going to be yet another story about how much worse it was than they thought even 2 months ago, or how many more species are going extinct than we understood even a year ago, whatever it may be. So I think in the realm of where we sit, and as just another thing in that relationship piece to take with you tonight before you hear from the others, as there was a great report put out by a group called the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. Very long name. Forget the name. But they had a very interesting way of framing sort of our relationship in the sense of values and valuation. And what they put out was we have to understand that we can't just live from nature in the way that we've been doing it. We have to understand we live in nature, we live with nature, and we live as nature. And that all four of those pieces have to come together. And I think to me that's what rights of nature and the legal construct represents, is combining all those four dimensions into one. And I think where we have been living and where most of the laws are sitting right now is really the living from. And unfortunately, the living from aspect isn't in a stewardship protective measure, it's largely still in a controlling destructive measure. So clearly we need nature in order to exist, but we have to do it in a way that's harmonious with nature, that's not going to undermine nature itself. But we also understand that we're living in it, with it, and we are nature. And until we get to that point, I think we're going to keep struggling to actually be where we need to be in a truly sustainable way. And we're not going to find technology to get it out of our situation. It's going to come from within and collectively. And it's going to have to be coming grounded into place. And I think having the Spokane River as part of this community is really the central place where the transformation can take place in Spokane, is really connecting with the river in the way that Jerry has in the work that he's been doing. That has to happen on a larger level. We have to change big systems. And I think rights of nature is a means to really become really a formidable foe to capitalism itself. Because if it's about saying no, if it's about changing behavior at that level, that capitalistic system, of course, isn't going to go quietly. They haven't been going quietly. In places in the United States where people have put rights of nature laws in place at the local level, the reaction has been to put state-level laws in place that forbid putting forward rights of nature laws at the local level, because they understand that's about a shift of power. And once you start to challenge power at the level that power understands, that power is going to react. And I think rights of nature is a very potent force to actually challenge that kind of system. And so it needs to continue to grow. It needs to show itself in as many places as possible. And it needs to be articulated in the way that actually says, this is how we want it to work. Because it's no longer a novel idea. I think initially it was just an idea that sort of got people either thinking and galvanized or oppositional to it. But we've gotten to the point now that we've seen it enough, it's been operational enough that we have to build it correctly, which also means we have to protect it. Because like a lot of other things, it's also vulnerable to being co-opted and greenwashed and sort of redirected in a way that it was never intended. So as much as it's in this very good trajectory to become something that I find to be inevitable, the question is, what does it really look like? It's going to take a lot of work to really protect the core principles of what rights of nature means. And so it can happen here, it's been happening in other places, but it's going to take really the shift in thinking, the shift in relationship, and ultimately, as we become more part of place, I think that becomes a natural evolution to understand how relationships work and why we need different systems and ultimately perhaps different laws that reflect the sense of what nature needs, as we are part of that and we have a role to play to make sure that it's viable and healthy. And that's, I think, the idea of what rights of nature has come to mean, not only in the United States, but globally as well. And I think a very powerful element to grow that has really been the tribes. More and more tribes are understanding the potency of it, not because it's a new idea, but I think it's a means of which the old ideas have maybe some more strength of which they haven't had in some time. And I think that's the potency of rights of nature for the tribes themselves. And so I think we have a lot to learn from one another. So it's a coming together of different communities, grounded in place, and understanding that we can't let the dominant system continue as it is. It has to go away. And rights of nature, I think, is a means to lead us in that direction. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I hope my voice projects loud enough. Yeah? Yeah? Okay, good. Tatsala. My name is Elliott Moffett, and I want to thank Jerry for the invitation and to come up to Gonzaga to speak tonight on the rights of Mother Earth, of nature, and appreciate the words that Kai has presented this evening too. We've worked together and share ideas and experiences, so that's been very valuable. And I have my perspective. I'm a member of the Nez Perce tribe and co-founder, and now I'm the former president of that nonprofit, Nimiipuu Protecting the Environment. We founded that and along with others on the reservation, and we really got our start with the megalotes issue. You may remember that when these large gargantuan equipment was being transported, destined to the tar sands of Canada, and going through this part of the country, and the tribe and tribal members, as well as other people too. We had a good turnout of people. thought that, hey, that's a dangerous thing to happen, these large pieces of equipment going up our river valleys. And as large as they were, we're concerned about spillage in the rivers and turning those large pieces of equipment over in river valleys where you can't get cranes in and pull them out. And so we were, because we're a treaty tribe, the Nez Perce tribe is, then we were looking to our trustee, the federal government, to tell us, well, what are the implications that these megaloads may have on our treaty rights. And as it was going through the national forest, these megaloads. So the Forest Service has not only trust responsibility to the Indian people, but they also have responsibilities for ensuring that federal law is enforced and protected. Some of those instances, like the rivers that go through the rivers and the forests that go through the national forest. And it didn't do an analysis on what may happen. So the tribe took it to court, and we actually won and stopped the megaloads from going through our part of the country because they didn't consult with the tribe and do that type of analysis. But those are under treaty rights. And so I'm going to speak about that this evening, about how the implications of the rights of nature involve our treaty rights and responsibilities, as I call them. And I will speak to the tribal law and procedures. Well, first we'll talk a little bit about why we chose that, and Kai had mentioned some of those factors already, that the status quo isn't good enough for us, that it's unacceptable, in particular with the Snake River, because of the condition that it's in. And I'll speak a little bit about the cultural aspect, our traditional aspects on why we're going this route too. And finally, the traditional laws that are enforced by doing this too, and that relates to our tribal jurisdiction and sovereignty. But first, as we are here at Gonzaga, let me make a couple of acknowledgments. And since we're in the law school, my customary qualifications that I've served in many capacities with the tribe, from being the first associate judge of our tribal court to being tribal council chairman, to serving on the tribal council, to being a prosecutor at one time, not when I was a judge, but at a different time. And so I've had served those capacities, but I don't represent the Nez Perce tribe this evening. So I have to make sure that that's understood, that the Nez Perce tribe as a government has its own spokespeople. And so I have to say that. And so my comments don't represent policies of the tribe, but unless specifically stated so, and what we'll be talking about is one of those policies that have been adopted by the tribe, and that's the recognition of the rights of the Snake River. So that's one that is a policy that I can relate. So we were the Nimiipuu Protecting the Environment. Nimiipuu is our name for ourselves. We were given the name Nez Perce, but back in our history, we called ourselves Nimiipuu, which loosely translates to the people. So we're the people, but even though I'm not with Nimiipuu Protecting the Environment any longer, we will be starting another nonprofit in our neck of the woods, so to speak, on our side of the reservation. And I'd like to acknowledge also the works of nonprofits like the Riverkeepers and all of the good work that they do, the hard work that they do, and we're lucky that way because there's a lot of open source documents that we can refer to about issues prevalent to us, like climate change, like dam removals, and that's what we next got involved in. Was we saw that that the salmon weren't doing very well at all, and so we thought, well, everyone has been working on this for years and years, and still we see the lack of recoveries for salmon. And so we thought, well, we needed to give that kind of a shot in the arm. And so we formed our nonprofit, also worked on the issue of the plight of the salmon, steelhead, other species like Pacific lamprey, and on the Snake River itself, we focused on because its proximity to the tribe and our history with the tribe. And so with my acknowledgement, I too would like to acknowledge the people that were here before us. I'd like to acknowledge this land and the rivers that had been taken care of by people before us, like the Spokanes and the Kootenays and the Coeur d'Alenes, Pondereys and the Palouse. These people, and we have that commonality, and again, I don't speak for them either. They can speak for themselves, but I don't represent them either, other than to acknowledge that we do have commonalities that we do share, and one of them is our history, and we share that with a lot of people. That even here where we're meeting, we had the last ice age. Parts of the glacier came this far north, or this far south rather, and we had lobes of glaciers here, and then it was starting to melt, and all of these lakes were forming. Glacial Lake Spokane was here, and as we all know, Glacial Lake Missoula broke, was breached, and helped create some of the landscapes that we see around here. And some of our people were there. And I remember reading about, or seeing on media, when was it, back in 2011, when the tsunamis devastated the coastal Japan, and watching the videos on how 30 feet of water breached over seawalls, and then thinking about the horror and wonderment of that happening. And then thinking about, I've heard geologists say that the wall of water that came from Lake Missoula may have been 300 feet. And that came through here maybe. And so that in itself boggles the mind. And that's created a lot of our landscape here. So I'd like to acknowledge that, and that people were here, and where we are from, down on the Salmon River, one of the archaeological sites, it's called at Cooper's Ferry, if you want to look it up, has an archaeological site which dates back to 16,000 years. So you see, even archaeology bears out geology and habitation here. And so within all of those years, those thousands of years, then we've developed that relationship that's been talked about here. We've developed a relationship with nature, what we call our Mother Earth. because we recognize that that's a relationship that we have. Just like your mother, she protects you and she provides for you, and then in return, then until you're ready to take care of yourself, ourselves, and then that's reciprocated, then we take care of our mothers. And it's a reciprocal relationship that way. And so when I speak about values, and this is one of the values that's shared with other indigenous people, is that we understand that relationship, that it is one of reciprocity. And reciprocity, even observing that, experience that, goes into our justice systems. You know, one of the most famous court cases in federal Indian law is Crow Dog, as you may know. And Crow Dog was a case of reciprocity, where the Indian tribe just killed another Indian, and so the Indians took care of it, exercising the justice of reciprocity. Well, Americans saw that and they said, that's not good enough, that this person is to take care of that family for the rest of their lives. And so they ordered that not apply, and so took that case, Crow Dog, and found that he was guilty of murder and should be subject to another form of justice. So those are examples of incongruency with our cultures, and so this is something that, while it's an incongruency, we do have commonalities, though, that we can all share. And those commonalities include such things as clean water and clean air. So when working on the fish issue, then we noticed that people had been working on it for a very long time. You know, some of our organizations, at least 20 years, and we have spent billions of dollars trying to recover salmon, billions of dollars, and still they're still on the threatened and endangered species list. So that's unacceptable to us, and we felt like, well, not enough has been done. The urgency that needs to be recognized wasn't recognized, so we started to work on that issue by holding what we called flotillas, where we would get folks together and talk about the issues of salmon recovery. And so you may have attended some of those flotillas that we had in Clarkston, Washington, where we'd have like 600 to 700 flotation devices, all wanting to talk about the rivers and the salmon and how we can do our duties and responsibilities in that protection. So we help raise that awareness and help educate people about those kinds of things that come up that everyone wonders about. They wonder about, well, what's going to happen if the dams are taken out? What's going to happen to the energy? What's going to happen to the barging? What's going to happen to the valleys and this and that? And so we were trying to educate people about those types of things. And I would say it was fairly successful. It wasn't just the success of our organization, it was many other organizations working together with us. And so now you see plans about actually breaching the dams. There's plans from Governor Inslee's office, there's plans from senators and representatives, even the state of Idaho representative has a plan on breaching the dams. And so that's pretty amazing. You know, that's one of the things that we've never seen before. And so we take some credit working together again. We couldn't have done it ourselves, or no one can do it themselves. So I think that's a prescription for our work in the future, is that type of collaboration, consultation, and cooperation. Chief Joseph said, "The earth is the mother of all people, and all people should have equal rights upon it." And so that kind of has led us in our efforts and in our life ways on how we relate to our mother, and is that she is the mother of all. I come from that kind of culture and tradition, not only traditional, but my family specifically was involved in the Christianity movement on the reservation as well, and whom I'm named after, Ed Palatkat. He was one of our first ordained Nez Perce ministers. He was also what's known as one of the 5 brothers that would travel over to Buffalo country and have adventures over there. And so I was named after Moses Monteith, and that's Ed Palatkat. And so we try to bring those kinds of relationships forward, and we try to remind ourselves about those kinds of relationships, which is pretty hard, as you all know today, because everyone has their head down, looking at their electronic devices. So how do you take that time and talk about their relationships with their earth and with the natural world? And so that's the challenges that we have, and that's why one of the reasons why we want to start a nonprofit too, is that we want to develop that relationship with our people. And so the tribe, and that was in 2020, with everyone with the pandemic, then that put the brakes on a lot of activities that we could have been doing and further developed, and it was very devastating to our tribal community, and still is. There's much pain there, and we're in the midst of healing, as a lot of communities are. And so we're right there with you too. We're trying to heal ourselves and heal our neighbors and our relationships. But in that 20, a special general council was held for the Nez Perce tribe. And the general council is all voting members of the tribe. And we come together twice a year, and once a year we elect our tribal council. The other meeting, we elect our general council officers. And so under notions of popular sovereignty, then it's a general council that is the sovereign. The people are the sovereign. And so we delegate authority to our tribal councils to implement and execute tribal policy. And so I was able to sponsor the motion, which was adopted by the General Council, recognizing the rights of the Snake River. That was in 2020. I had promised Jerry that I'd get him a copy of that, and I didn't send him an electronic copy, so I'll make sure I get that to him before we leave. So we took that to our general council, and the general council adopted that. So that is the tribal policy, and now it's up to the tribal council to execute that policy. And so we've been in that type of discussions with our tribal council on putting that into policies and procedures of the tribe in order for us to recognize that not only the Snake River, but other things of Mother Earth deserve to have their rights recognized. But, and the reason why we chose the Snake River, of course, is because of the condition of the Snake River. We've traveled on the Snake River ourselves, and there are times when you can't swim in the river because of the algae blooming. And we know that with the reservoirs that, I call them, they become cesspools of death for our salmon, which require fast-moving, clean water. So, those reservoirs just heat up in the summertime. And so so we've been advocating for more spill and those kinds of things for passage. But we think that breaching the dams is the best option and the only option, actually, because we seem to have tried everything else. And so that's our option now, and we're advocating for that to happen. So the tribe is in the throes or they're about to develop those tribal policies, and that means that we'll look at our tribal law and order code and implement any laws that we need to recognize those rights, being more specific. We designated that guardians have the right to speak on the interest of the rights of the Snake River, and so that has to be developed on who then will be recognized as guardians, and we'll be in those types of discussions with the tribe. And we believe that those rights of nature are consistent with our treaty rights and responsibilities. And I always put those together, rights and responsibilities, because I have a right, for an example, to hunt and fish in our usual and accustomed areas on the Nez Perce Reservation and ceded areas. But I also have responsibilities not to overfish. I have responsibilities to take care of the meat. I have responsibilities to help feed others, and so those responsibilities go with those rights. And part of the rights that we want acknowledged and recognized also is the right to protect that habitat. And that has to go along with the right to hunt and fish, because if you don't have any fish, how much rights do you have? So we believe that should be recognized too. And we've been in, we have a lot of forest lands in our what we call the ceded area, usual and customs areas. Those are treaty designations. And so are particularly concerned about activities with the Forest Service in that they protect those areas like the rivers from overcutting, from overgrazing, and as well as we have other species concerns with gray wolves, grizzly bears, wolverines, and then everything from our homes where we have agriculture activities that are going on lands that feed into our rivers. But we have that relationship, and we're trying to express that relationship that has existed. So those are, I think that's pretty much what I had to say. That I guess finally is that this would be considered our traditional law as well, that I have not only the responsibility under treaty rights, but traditionally we have those obligations too to act in the best interest of that relationship that we have with our mother and the waters like the Snake River. So the reason, the urgency that's needed with the Snake River, we felt that was needed so we could, so the tribe could, in its negotiations with the United States and with these other fora, like the Columbia River Treaty, with these other federal agencies that they represent to them, that it is now the policy of the tribe that the rights of the Snake River will be recognized. So again, I'd like to thank you for this time, and we'll be available for the questions.
How loud my voice can bellow, but I'll try. My name is Caroline Kiever. I graduated Gonzaga undergrad here in 2020 with environmental studies and political science degrees, and I am currently in my final semester here at Gonzaga Law and pursuing a career in environmental policy. Growing up, I spent a lot of time outdoors. My love for the environment really developed in the eastern Sierras of California. And I knew I had this love for the environment, and I wanted to pursue a career that would guide me more towards conservation efforts. In the beginning, I wanted to be an environmental scientist. However, as I was a biology major, I soon realized it was too much at the macro level, and I was not into it anymore, so I switched over to environmental studies. And this was also with my parents reminding me that law and legislation is a great way of affecting positive change in the world. So I took their advice, I took the LSAT, and I found myself at law school. But since coming to law school, I've come to realize that the current system isn't going to bring about that positive change that we need in the world right now, that there needs to be a major shift, not just of our laws, but of our ethics, of our relationship we have with nature, and of our cultural aspects as well. So, in the current model, as soon as you come to law school, when you sit down in your property law class, your environmental law class, you realize that we view nature and we're inheriting a system which views nature as property. It's something we have dominion and ownership of. And this is really set in the framework of Western culture and Western ideology. And unfortunately, this has led us to what Professor Gordon, wherever if he's in here, the tragedy of the commons, which we learned about a lot during our environmental studies degree, essentially meaning that we are taking way more from the environment than we are putting back, and we are thinking of the now rather than a sustainable future. And this point is really brought home when we see the law and how we perpetuate this through the durability of private claims to public property. For example, we have permits and leases, oil, gas, coal leases, we have grazing permits, we have hydropower leases, and we are continuing, once again, this is collective we are continuing to expand or renew these permits and licenses, and we are expanding them, renewing them, protecting them through our bureaucratic processes, even when we have evidence that shows that these practices are no longer working for our environment, that we are doing more harm than good through these practices. And I have focused a lot of my time and research on hydropower facilities. I worked a lot on Snake River Dam litigation, and then also with Spokane Riverkeeper. I've learned a lot about the Vista projects and basically how dams are impacting our natural rivers and the fisheries that exist within them. And the durability of private claims is especially evident when you are looking at hydropower leases. For example, there's the FERC, which is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and they issue licenses for dams from somewhere between 30 to 50 years for a lot of them. And the major way, if you find out that a dam's no longer working as it should, if it's doing more harm than good, then the comment period, which Kai mentioned prior, is the time to really effectuate that change and to bring about the issue, and you're going to find the most success of bringing awareness for the need for breaching or removing the dam. And so summer of 2021, I interned with a group called Earth Law Center and on the Snake River Dam litigation. A lot of my time I spent researching. It was a primarily research-based internship where I researched the biology of salmon and steelhead. I also spent a lot of time studying the Endangered Species Act, the Clean Water Act, and FERC, and basically finding ways or holes in the argument for trying to bolster the argument for why these lower four Snake River dams should be coming down. And there were times where I was just muddling through hours of research, hours of case law, and there's one time where I found a case. It's called Tennessee Valley Authority v. Hill, and I thought I found the smoking gun. I thought me as a second-year law student found the solution to everything that would make the dams come down. I was naive. Well, essentially, there was a violation of the Endangered Species Act. This dam was already being constructed, and then it found out that it was ruining the critical habitat of a certain endangered species, and then they halted construction of the dam. Later on, well, at first it seemed like a big win for the Endangered Species Act and for the conservation and community. However, then there were some loopholes that came, and Eisenhower basically granted them, like, there's an agreement that went about, and they continued construction of the dam. So that was not going to be the smoking gun that I was looking for. But it also presented some hope in it all. But in reality, all my research, all my looking into the Endangered Species Act, the Clean Water Act, kind of just deflated me a little bit. So the Endangered Species Act has 3 sections which has bearing on dam removal decisions. One deals with prevention of jeopardy of endangered species, and another has to deal with the prohibition of taking of illicit species. And as I mentioned, the Tennessee Valley Authority case was the primary case law that I found that was relevant to the Endangered Species Act, and that could be geared most towards the Snake River litigation. And once again, it appeared to be a great tool. However, it did not work out in the end, essentially. And it's interesting to note that the Endangered Species Act has been considered in many dam removal cases and voluntary removals. However, it's never been used to compel a removal, which once again is a little deflating because we have these laws in place which we think are going to effectuate the change that we actually need. The Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, they've done so much, but they don't do quite enough that we need. And my dad often tells me, don't go reinvent the wheel. Just a third-year student, you can't go blow everything up, you need to find a way to work in the system. And I think that's something that a lot of students are told, is just find a way to work in the system. But the current system is not working in the way that we need it. It's not doing quite enough. And as mentioned prior, I'm not voting for ruling out the Clean Water Act or the Endangered Species Act. I think that they need to be further bolstered with another law. And I think that this comes in the form of rights of nature. And I remember reading an article in undergrad that said, do trees have standing? And standing basically means if a party has the capacity and the ability to bring a suit against someone. And I read it and I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like, trees, if they're like brought harm upon them, they should be able to bring a case in the court. But then this passed and it went into the back of my mind, and it didn't resurface until the summer of 2021 when I interned with Earth Law Center. And Earth Law Center is another group who focuses a lot on rights of nature. And during Snake River Dam litigation, amidst all the Endangered Species Act, Clean Water Act, my mentor, Elizabeth Dunn, brought about the term rights of nature to me. And I never knew that it had the name. I had an understanding of the idea, but never put a name to it. And ever since then, I've done a lot of research on rights of nature, And I'm still continuing to learn, and I am working with Riverkeeper since January 2022 on a Rights of Nature campaign. However, we think that it's very beneficial for people to learn more about it as we are learning about it as well. And to just have this discussion today is just a great win for everyone. So, speaking about rights of nature, it's not as fantastical as I think a lot of people think. It's not so out there. This is a rebranding or an adoption of indigenous ideals, the way that indigenous people have always seen nature. And I think a major point is that people see rights of nature as putting nature in a terrarium where we cannot touch it, we cannot recreate in it, and that we cannot use it. And this is just a false interpretation of it all. I believe it is, I love recreating in the outdoors. I love to hike. I love to fish. And then granting rights to the environment to exist and flourish doesn't mean we have to stop doing those things. Because after all, how are you supposed to zealously advocate for those things which you have no relation to? Overall, it is about rethinking our relationship with the environment. It means appreciating the beauty and the strength of every fish you catch. Did you guys know that sockeye salmon, which return to Redfish Lake in Stanley, Idaho, travel 900 miles and more than 6,500 feet in elevation to spawn? It's pretty cool. I mean, I hiked the Enchantments last year, and I was out of commission for a week, and that was 18 miles. But once again, this just should remind us of how magnificent nature is. And rights of nature, once again, does not have to be a far out there idea. It's really something that aligns with our ideals much more than we probably expect it to. It's about giving organisms, fish, the river, the trees, a bigger seat at the table when we're making decisions. And also, did you know that corporations are already given personhood status? Corporations don't provide air, water, or sustenance. It can satiate our capitalistic appetites, but that means nothing without air or water. Keep that in mind. And finally, this isn't only a legal concept, but it's a philosophical and ethical one as well. It changes man's perception of nature from a property right to one of coexistence. It thinks of not only the now, but future generations. It is a cultural adoption from indigenous tribes, and it is a way to create a more sustainable future. We need to start thinking about the 7th generation. We can't just think about now. We can't think about us. We can't think about satiating our appetites right now. And I also believe that this is a solution, not a solution, but a step in the right direction that many people can get behind if we continue to have these discussions today. Thank you.
Well, thank you to all three of our panelists. I also would be remiss if I did not thank Gonzaga Environmental Studies Program, Gonzaga Science Department, and the Environmental Law Society, who are actually sponsoring this tonight. What I'd like to do with the time we have is open this for several questions. And I think we can certainly, I don't know that I can, I can run the mic over to you all. And then we can just try to call on folks. I don't have a mic to run up and down. So I would just ask that you use your big voice when called upon. How's that sound? All right. Questions for our three panelists? Yes.
Great presentations, lots of information. I think all of us would love to know whether it's Clean Water Act, whether it's environmental protection, whether it's lobbying. Where are we with enforcement? And where are we with legislation that's meaningful for maintaining at least the quality of water we have?
Well,
You want me to take a whack at that? Or you?
Yeah, I mean, in our world, I guess we see most of that as not worth participating in. It sounds kind of weird. Mainly because of what it's designed to do, which is largely not to protect in the manner that we want. Because there's an inclination, and I think it's the right one, to sort of hold those to account and enforce what we have, right? That's a natural thing to say, hey, we've got rules, why aren't they being followed? Let's enforce them. What I think it comes down to is saying, well, how much time is that going to take and where are we going to end up versus do we need to chart a different course for ourselves? So it's about time allocation more so than do you hold up the framework of what is to a better level because it should be sort of a thing. And I think those are hard questions because we see what it should be like, and if there's a shortfall, it's a natural thing to say, why aren't you doing what you're supposed to be doing? But from a time perspective or political perspective, for those who work in that world can tell you that that's a tremendous lift at times because of the obstructions, the way that industry works, the way that lobbying works. You just never really get there, even though when you look at it in black and white, it says this. Like, why isn't this? As an example, work with a group in Oregon that's trying to expand the definition of beneficial use around water. So they've got a whole administrative reality of what the state can do to stipulate what is a beneficial use and what isn't. And they've been spending now 2 years just to get the state to sort of even entertain the question of whether or not illegal marijuana growing operations should be considered beneficial use. And that's their one area that they're working on. And there's nothing wrong for them to want to do that because there's means of which to hold water use to a certain account. The ultimate question is, how long is that going to take us and where do we actually end up? And so from my perspective, which isn't going to fully answer your question, if there's another structural way to go about it through something like rights of nature, are we better off putting time and effort there, which then collapses some of these other things that aren't actually being withheld, and then putting something up at a higher level versus a more regulatory type level that a lot of places that we're told that we have to operate in. I mean, that's the whole idea of the rights structures, right, is to put rights are at the upper echelon, if they're supposed to be. Now, of course, not all rights are even protected in the way that they should be. But it puts us in a different ground, different space than just doing regulatory type enforcement. So that's my perspective to answer your question, which probably doesn't answer it fully. I'm sure Jerry and Elliott, as practitioners in that world, could give you a better response or a different one.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I know there are several tribal cases that are making their way through the court system right now that might provide some cracks in the structure. But there was also the case in Colorado where an attorney trying to file for the rights of the Colorado River was thrown out of court with a frivolous lawsuit and threatened with disbarment. So how would you advise attorneys who would be reluctant to take on a personhood case because of their concerns about that kind of a response?
Yeah, that's a very real thing. I mean, we were actually involved in that case. And we've been involved in other cases where sanctions have been brought against the attorneys for the same reason. So this is where the work gets difficult because we're looking for, at 2 a.m., the case that's going to win it all. The truth is that it doesn't exist. So the question is, how much legal work can we do in this new paradigm versus how much movement, political, culture work that has to be done to then create the opening for the legal stuff to really take root. And so it's a tricky place to be, especially for attorneys, because you're bound and you have your ethics and you could be taken up. And we've had attorneys, in fact, Elizabeth Dunn, that she mentioned, was sanctioned in one of the cases that we're involved in. And so, yeah, it becomes a difficult place for licensed attorneys to go when you start doing, movement. It's basically movement lawyering. And in any kind of movement lawyering, you're testing new grounds. And within that, there's the possibility of taking out legal representation, which is just another means for the system to reject the notion of systemic change. So yeah, it makes some of the legal stuff, at least in this country right now around rights of nature, kind of difficult. But then you have, this is about pushing boundaries, right? And, you know, if the salmon are gonna make their almost 1,000-mile journey, then maybe we have to step up to maybe put ourselves also in harm's way. But that's of course a personal choice when you get there. But we had a case in Lincoln County, Oregon, where they had passed a law banning aerial spray of pesticides by the timber industry, and in the process recognizing nature's rights. And so one of the parties that we tried to bring into the case was the Siletz River watershed. And so we motioned to intervene with that entity because the rights are now recognized, so why can't the river speak? The judge ultimately didn't let the case in, but it was interesting because she said, well, this is something that needs to be looked at more. This is something that needs to evolve. This is something that we really need to sort of wrap our heads around. And so though it never, that river never got into the courtroom as it should, you know, these are, again, little cracks of maybe the movement evolution, just in the way that other movements have sort of challenged law to change law. But yeah, it's a tricky place for lawyers to be because there's always that likelihood. I mean, even in the realm, you know, a lot of our work is also pinned this idea of sovereignty, but sovereignty within local governmental units. So this idea of local self-government, that it exists, and without the ability to exercise it, how can we actually protect ourselves because of the way that the hierarchical system of government works? And even those kind of things get scoffed at and threatened for sanctions, that you can't even argue the right of self-government, which if people had their own conversations would say, well, I thought that was already a possibility. But of course, as we see in the way that municipal governmental units are controlled by the state, you can't even argue for things that you think you should justly be able to argue for. So it's a tricky range, tricky area to be in. But I think we still need lawyers doing that. We need warrior lawyers willing to make those arguments, even if at times the sanctions may get threatened. So.
Well, congratulations to the first tribe on reasserting the rights of the nature of Snake River. And I wanted to ask, in terms of where does the rights of the Snake River stand today, rights of nature of the river, and the rights of nature of the Spokane River? You know, most people probably know there was, well, at the time, felt like an epic battle, the indigenous Spokane community of Spokane, in terms of the 3, I think, or 4 attempts to bring community bill of rights that included rights of the river and of the aquifer. And in one of those cases, that rights of the river came within 500 votes in a city-wide vote, which is quite remarkable. So, you know, now we've left the idea of Spokane as next to nature, next to perfect. We've moved on to Sports Town USA and Town USA, which is all good and fine, I suppose. But, you know, where do you stand with the river's native rights and nature and the Spokane Snake River as well?
Well, right now within the tribe, we're working on those issues, and I think that is the idea, is that we use that as a model, if you will, for reaching out to other jurisdictions and other entities to say, we've done this, and actually we've been talking about it too, on how we do this and raise it for a greater audience for other folks, and now that we're kind of on, hopefully, I pray that we're on the downside of the pandemic, that we can have get-togethers where we have these just types of discussions where we work out nuts and bolts on how communities can weigh in on the issues and what their city councils may do. We plan to take our dog and pony shows to our local city councils and commissioners as well, and relate this kind of work that we're doing and the results that we've seen elsewhere happen, which have been all positive, and I'm real hopeful. I've seen a lot of good work happening, like what's happening here in Spokane. I've seen a lot of riverways, streams being recovered, and you know, that open sourcing that you see, and it improving the communities, you know, that to the extent where the people didn't even expect it to be improved like it is, and developing those relationships with those streams. So I think that action is where we head next. We're kind of at that talking stage. Now we got to put those policies to action, and that's where we are internally with the tribe as we're going to try to implement that policy now.
You've introduced a lot of very complicated concepts. As an old farmer that's only been here for about 119 years, my clan, it's very thought-provoking. First, I'd like to thank the Nez Perce for bringing Toho back to Leftley Creek. It's great to see him spawn with us. I've been around a little. I've seen. I'll try to do it in less than a minute. This is a hard concept. I don't know if I can do it or not. I'll try. I've seen rivers in Ukraine, Russia, Uzbekistan, El Salvador, and almost every state in the United States. We're doing a great job compared to the rest of the world. And as a farmer, I wake up every day and I try to look at the big picture to see if I can get my work done for the day. And looking at the big picture on this planet, there's 8 billion of us. And I'm reading two camps. One camp says we're going to grow to 10 billion. The other camp says we've got to reduce to 2 billion. So the question is, how can we use our technology to continue to improve our rivers, to get salmon back in the Lapway, to get salmon back in the Spokane, and still have 10 billion, or are we going to fall into the abyss of having 2 billion and having somebody choose 6 billion to die?
Well, I mean, I don't think it's like, what was the movie where the guy snaps his fingers in half, the Marvel movies? You know what I'm talking about? It's not going to be that way. So it's a question of carrying capacity. You know, your soil only has so much carrying capacity unless you want to artificially prop it up, right? So what's the carrying capacity of the ecosystem that you're a part of? Which ultimately means, you know, how much of all the different communities, including human communities, can be a part of that. And so I think those are big questions to then figure out what is the population balance in the end of, you know, humans to other species. I think in relation to where we're headed, I mean, take the population count, for instance, in the way that you just described. If that's all predicated on continuing the way that we're continuing, which is largely about industrial level production, consumption for consumption's sake, we know where it's headed, which is about the collapse of all kinds of systems, including human systems, despite what our environmental realities may be here. We also have to remember that we have also offshored a lot of destruction in other places to maintain our, you know, semblance of pristineness here, like other countries have. You know, people want to laud, you know, the Swedes and the Norwegians and the Finns, for instance, for their great quality of life, but they're also part of extraction. They just happen to do it somewhere else. But I think the somewhere else is starting to catch up. So I don't know exactly the answer to your 2 versus, you know, 10 billion population thing, but I think it's ultimately about what's the balance? Can we create balance? And if we're going to have technology, can it be used in a creative way that doesn't undermine the ecosystem, so the salmon can run, so the other fish can run? And I think that's where the clashing is going to come in, but also I think that's where human ingenuity can be applied to do something positive versus just being applied to be creative for creative's sake, which is largely led to the conditions that we have, whether it's forest or rivers or soil or whatnot. So I think when we get to that point, if we can get to that point, there's going to be a natural leveling off, potentially of human population. But I don't think it's going to be a choice of 6 million, you're gone. It's a matter of where we proceed from here that will determine whether the population load will be a certain way that can be maintained because we're actually in more harmony with place. Right now we've been what we're doing now literally is stealing from the future, but it seems like it's all feasible because we're living it now. So I think our time perspective is off, and that's part of our problem is we have such limited time because our lives are only so long. And so it's a question of, again, that relationship piece, how we farm, what we produce. Ultimately, it's going to come down to what we value, right? And so it's a value proposition, it's a value question. And I would love for that to be more of what we debate or argue or have conversations about versus where things go politically today, which is about sending people, in most cases, to do camps to basically fight one another instead of having good conversations to say, well, what do we truly value? What are the systems we can build? How do we do it in a way that doesn't collapse ecosystems, but works in harmony with them? And at that point, I think if you get there, then you will naturally figure out what is the right kind of population for humans on the planet. And have you seen those lines in history of human populations over time? And it shows it basically being steady, and then it hits the industrial era, human population just goes crazy, because we thought we found the ticket. And the problem is that explosion has created all kinds of destabilization, which threatens our own existence, not just the salmon. Elliott or...
Well, I think briefly that those kinds of questions we have to address those all the time, even within our own communities, because we're landowners too. We have other conventions that we live by that may not be traditional or cultural, but we're still engaged in them. We go to the grocery stores, for an example, where we used to depend on Mother Earth to provide all of our needs, and so we have those same questions now. We have own land, we have farmland, and we have to get grains to market just like others too. But at what cost? That's what we ask ourselves. At what cost do we use the barges that go down the river when barge traffic has declined in the last 10, 20 years? And so we have to look at systems. We have to look at our own systems and what some have called decolonizing. When I was on tribal council, I was the chairman of our natural resources subcommittee. And so we have to take a look at that, and natural resources is an economic term. And so we have to look at that from our perspective that's not a traditional or cultural aspect that we want to represent when we deal with our Mother Earth. And so we have to look at our systems. And I think everyone, that has to look at systems in place where it is too often adversarial, that we have these relationships within our communities that turn adversarial. But we have to find those common areas that by consulting with one another, and we've seen that happen. We've seen, that there was a large and a long history where the Klamath dams are going out. But sure, there's some that don't like that, and there will be those. But in the main, those people have talked with one another, and they understand each other's interest, and so that's happening. And there are other scales where communities themselves talk with uses, agricultural uses, whether they be husbandry uses or anything else, and how can we work so that we have the clean water that doesn't have phosphates in it, that doesn't have the pesticides, and we have to talk with the road departments that are killing those very same coho over here because of the residues from tires. We have to rethink how we deal with those issues, and we drive cars and we drive on the roads. So what are we going to do about that? And that's something that we have to have those discussions about. But The systems don't always fit our interest, and so when that comes up, then we have to say that and be able to be at that table in order to say that, and oftentimes we're not. So that's why I come to these sessions, is that we have a perspective to represent, and we'll be doing that.